Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue, and today is episode 63, Beyond Whack-A-Mole, Future-Proof Against Tomorrow's Threats. And our guest today is Heather Vescent, Executive Director of ID Pro and renowned futurist and documentary filmmaker. And our co-host today is Eric Leach, currently an independent consultant, but also co-founder of Strata, a veteran of Sun, and an engineer at a little-known but embryonically influential company called Critical Path. Also, I saw worked with Ben Golub at Storage. So welcome, guys. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. Great to be here. Yes. I'll just clarify. I'm no longer the executive director of ID Pro.
Okay. Sorry about that. And
okay.
Eric, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So before we start, maybe you could just give a quick intro to your background, and Heather, you can tell us, okay, what are you doing now?
Yeah, great. Okay, so I started back in the 90s working for Silicon Valley startups, and I helped build and launch over, I think, 50 technology products and websites back in the 90s and early aughts. Then I decided to become a futurist and got my master's of science in strategic foresight and worked as a futurist. One of the topics I worked in that area and that space was with cybersecurity. Wrote this great paper with Bob Blakely, and that really inspired me to see the positive impact of thinking about the future, specifically applied towards cybersecurity, which is often very reactive. So today, a couple months ago, I just kind of relaunched my business brand as a cybersecurity futurist. And my goal here is to help people think about the future, to understand where they are today. And kind of, okay, so the way I like to describe it is if in Star Trek, you've got the Klingon ship decloaking, and imagine that you have the ability to see that ship decloaking before everyone else. And so that's the kind of power I want to give to folks.
That's interesting. And I just reread the paper you mentioned that you wrote with Bob, and I have a lot of movies added to my watch list now. So thank you for that.
We tried to make the scenarios fun.
Yeah. So Eric, I just mentioned a couple of your past jobs, but I consider you one of the oldest not oldest, I mean, you're very young looking, but I mean, like have really been around since the beginning. Identity. Wow. So tell us a little bit about how you got here.
So I've been in product management for 25 years now. And I started in identity accidentally. I remember the identity market before Active Directory, believe it or not.
Got my start. Active Directory was that new thing.
It was like sort of a thing, yeah. And we were like, please don't do that, and everybody did it anyway. And so I've always worked in the enterprise and B2B products, focused on identity, access management, and cybersecurity. And I did that at places like Critical Path and Sun and Oracle and Salesforce, as well as a handful of startups as well. Some that I joined and others that I co-founded. And now what I'm doing is I'm working about a year and a half ago. I started a consulting and advisory business where I work as a fractional chief product officer. And what I do as a part of that is I help people to figure out or refine their vision and their strategy and their roadmap for their products. And, what does it look like today and where are they going to be in 5 years? And then do they have the teams and the tools and the process and, all of the things to execute that, right? And really help them to build that out. And then I spend a lot of time on product storytelling. So, because I find people really need help with connecting people to their mission and their purpose. Like, why are they doing what they're doing? And then, connect customers to that as well. Like, who cares? Like, why do you do who cares what you do? and so with all the stuff that's out there, the thousands and thousands and thousands of companies and products, like, how do you get people to understand and care about what you do? So that's what I do in the kind of the consulting and advisory business that I do now.
Right. And I think that'll be really helpful lens for our discussion on future of cybersecurity because, I mean, let's face it, enterprise that customers is sort of our business, and that's we want to understand how it impacts them. But Heather, why don't we start with the basics before we dive into like the details? What is strategic foresight? And it's not predictions. You say you were hassling me before. You said we don't do predictions. What's strategic foresight, and why is it a useful tool in the toolbox of enterprise cybersecurity professionals?
Yeah, great. So I'll just talk about predictions first because a lot of people hear I'm a futurist and they're like, well, what will the future be? Um, so a lot of people think the future is like the past and the present. There's one past and there's one present. So the idea is like, of course, there's one future. But the thing about the future is it hasn't happened yet. And the present actually is kind of got like, it's like twofold, right? So you've got the current state of where
Yeah.
we are today, and then you have like the forces of change, and you can actually track these forces of change. These are trends. They can be technology trends, demographic trends, all kinds of different types of trends, and they could be exponential trends, and you can like extrapolate those out. And some of them, like mobile phone adoption, or like the type of trends like Gartner or an analyst firm, you can see what those trends are like there'll be X number of IoT identity devices by 2030, right? But there are also other trends. In fact, these types of trends are trends that technology people don't really think about. There are other trends that are outside the technology space that can both impact technology futures and technology futures can influence. And we have an acronym that we use in strategic foresight called STEEP-V, which stands for society, technology, economics, environment, politics, and values. And so strategic foresight is taking data and information, seeing where we are, what the snapshot is today, where the trends are potentially going, and then creating visions of the future scenarios. Based on these scenarios, once you know, so you have scenarios, you're like, oh, I like that one, I don't like that one. Then you can do this technique called backcasting, which you can use strategy for. So if you're like, this is the future I want to have happen, then you can say, okay, what are the actions we need to take today on a plan or a roadmap in order to positively influence this future from happening? Or you might be like, okay, we don't want this future down here. So you can say, what power or resources do we have to be able to influence the reduction of that future happening? So strategic foresight really is the ability for you to have like a superpower to kind of like see the future coming and react to it faster and make more conscious and effective decisions to co-create the future you want to create. Now, let's apply that back to cybersecurity.
If
All
we
right,
can
do you
take
have a
a quick
question
break,
first?
I'd love to get Eric's feedback here. Eric is a product manager. We're trying to listen to customers and understand their needs. But I think, as Heather points out, I think that decision needs to be informed by our sort of vision of the future.
Yeah.
Do you use any of these techniques, or these are things that you think about
Yeah. In
as
fact,
with your product manager hat on?
yes, in fact, I do. And I think about them, maybe the tools and the way that I use them, I apply on maybe a less macro scale and on a shorter time horizon, right? So, and I think that's probably the difference. But yeah, I use techniques. There's one working backwards, right? Where you start from an outcome or an end state and you just say, what are all the things that would have to happen in order to get us to that outcome? I think that's one way of thinking about it. The other way of thinking about it is you've gone out, you've discovered that customer problem, you've heard it, right? And they've told you, like, hey, I have this thing. And if you did this for me, that would fundamentally change my life for the better. Please do that. And you go, okay. And then you go from that point and you do a user journey map. And so you take them on the steps that would get them to that experience of value from your product. And and that's what I mean by, like, maybe less macro and, a shorter time horizon, but like trying to, I guess, take those things that you're talking about, Heather, that are, much further out and like much bigger in scale and impact, but you do those on like a smaller incremental basis. And And I break them down in like 5, 3, 18, 5 year, 3 year, 18 months. And then what are you going to do over the next 2 to 4 sprints of your product development? Right. So, because you have to like, action
Make it
people.
tactical,
You have
right?
to, yeah, you have to get people like, what are you going to do when you show up on Monday? Right. And, so I think that the tactics and the approach is very, very similar actually.
You know what's really interesting, Eric? I actually started my career doing product management and product
Right.
marketing, and I got frustrated working for all of these startups that were ahead of their time. And so I really wanted to understand, well, these are actually really good ideas, but they're not economically feasible in a
Yeah.
company, a startup, a product. For a product to be successful, it has to make money, it has to have a market, and it has to have people that are willing to acknowledge that it's a pain point they're willing to pay to solve. There are a lot
Yeah.
of really great ideas and future thinking ideas out there without a market. Like my first company I worked for was a 3D VRML company in 1996.
Yeah.
I was the first product manager and usability tester of this new technology in 1999 that was called DHTML, which was later rebranded and is used all over the web. Nobody even knew about it or cared about it until 2004. So my own personal journey was I was attracted to all these new technologies and new ideas and tired for working for startups that were ahead of their time. So I was like, how can I keep working in this future space, which I have a talent for? Being a futurist is both some intuitive skills and some training to hone your ability to do this work. And so I was like, how can I do this work and still work in the future without getting my heart broken over and over, working for startups that fail, that 5 years later, they're the unicorn. And so that was part of my own personal journey. And I think it also, like for a while, I used to think about, because a lot of these technologies will really help humanity. But humanity is just not there yet. They just don't see it like they want to pay for it. And part of being a successful company is you have to, like, the air a company breathes is money. And so if the company doesn't make money, no matter how good the technology is or how beneficial, unless there is some money that's coming in to sustain that company, the technology and the idea will go away. So I don't like
If I
being
could,
limited by the capitalist limitations. So that's kind of why I personally shifted into just working in the space of the future to help entrepreneurs and other people like make more effective decisions for them to be successful while responding to and co-creating what our emerging future is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so one of my business mentors said to be proactive, not reactive. And what Eric mentioned about being tactically, like what does the team do on Monday? And I'm wondering specifically with regards to the emerging cybersecurity threat landscape. Do you have how should enterprise technologists approach that? I guess in a range for not just startups but also large enterprises maybe have more risk. Any
Right.
thoughts,
Yeah.
Sarah?
Yeah, actually, that is kind of like a middle gap. I really would love to discover and explore how to do that. Now, in the paper, Bob and I came up with these factors of the future, like increase of vulnerabilities or connected devices, kind of like trends. Like one of the ones you might talk about later is like the attacker cost or the defense cost. These are like variables that we can maybe do an analysis or understanding of where we are today. And first of all, one of the things I would love to understand is, are these variables useful? Are there other variables you should be thinking about? Did we miss something? These variables are based on, they're not from our brains. They are based on interviews that we conducted with CISOs and security folks. So we're reflecting back what we learned from our interviews. But one, I want to know, are these variables useful to think about? Are they ones that are important? Could we hone them down into something that's like, I don't know, the top 5 critical ones that might map to some trends, mapping those trends? And then in my mind, the way I would do it if I was like in a security team is I would understand which of the variables could have the biggest impact on me and our systems, and then see how our systems fit with the variables, and then understand, are there parts or sections of our systems or our security that are like A plus or like maybe a B, or they're, say we're really good with phishing or we're really good with some part of security. So we know that we feel pretty confident about those areas. But then there's other areas that we don't really have a good understanding. We're not really sure, we could be blindsided. And if you know where you are with part of your system or part of your systems, then you will have more resources to address the surprise black swan stuff that comes in. And so identify what you know and you can control, identify what you don't know about or you can't control, and then that gives you kind of more capacity to deal with what's coming in. That's my theory. Now, I would really love to work hands-on with some folks to put that in practice. This paper was the first step in kind of putting things together, like having some understanding about it. And unfortunately, I started speaking about this paper. I spoke at RSA in February 2020. So the pandemic came and kind of really interrupted.
Yeah.
That's why it's kind of like it got interrupted. And then I kind of went and did something else, and I kind of came back and said, you know what, there's some value in this. I want to kind of pick this back up and see.
I know how that feels. I finally got into OSCON after like 10 years of trying. I got it in 2020. Then it was canceled, and they never held it again. I lost my chance. Eric, any thoughts? Or and maybe we're jumping too much into the tactical. I'm just wondering, what are some of the big threats that you're thinking about?
Yeah, so I think there's two things that I want to tack on to what Heather said. So I think the first thing is all of the companies that we're talking about are getting measured on success and failure in 90-day increments, right? And that puts like a tremendous amount of pressure on people. Like it's like you got to grow revenue and expand your customer base and be profitable, and you have to do that in 90 days, right? So I think that's one thing to keep in mind as we think through the threat scenario. And then I think the second thing is when you go out and you survey the cybersecurity market and you look at what the technologies themselves are built to do, most of them, the vast majority of them, either in the way that they're built or the way that they're deployed and applied, are looking retroactively. They're sitting there waiting for humans to make mistakes, right? They're either waiting for them to set up and deploy and configure some technology inappropriately, or they're waiting for users to use it poorly or to get exploited in some way. Like most of the technologies, the vast majority of them are doing that. Even the people like lots of, we do predictive and we figure things out ahead of time. And it's like, yeah, not really. You'd like to, but you don't, right? And so I think those are two really powerful forces in the cybersecurity industry that are unavoidable, right? And so, and what I find interesting about this, right, is the way that this combines, right? These two things intersect. So, and Heather and I chatted about this earlier, so I'm going to throw this one out as the question now is, over that period of time, what we were talking about since 2019, the VC and private equity landscape, that universe, has invested over $60 billion in cybersecurity startups, right? And in that same time period, the incidence, number, cost, and severity of breaches has all gone up, like double-digit percentage, 30% worse than it was when we started that journey. So my question is like, what is going on, and what does that say about what happens next, right? Like what futures are we like trying to, by doing these things, right? What futures are we trying to, either enact or avoid?
Right. And I might just add as an add-on to that, I'm not sure that the rate itself isn't increasing. Not just that the attack surface area and the number of breaches is but maybe the rate itself, maybe it was increasing 30%. Maybe it's even going to increase 35% or more.
Yeah. So, it just goes up every year. Like you look at the stats and it's just like that number is going like this. And you think, well, we're spending a lot of money a lot of money to solve these problems, and it's not working.
Yeah.
So,
So, Eric, I've thought a lot about this question, and I think there are a lot of answers to it. And I think this is where I'm going to put on my futurist hat. Um, so, just to recap, the question is you're asking, like, we're spending so much money to solve all these security problems, and the problems are not getting solved, and in fact, are getting worse,
mhm,
right? Is that
yeah,
the
that's
short version?
exactly it. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple answers here. First one, super easy. Okay, so clearly where the money's getting sent is not solving it. Well, okay, first let me say back. First of all, you only track the number of incidents that actually happen, not the ones that you stop, right? So who can say? Really, you can't say, oh, we stopped it because we don't actually have that data. So that makes uncertainty in this space.
Mhm.
Also, okay, so number two, um, if this is the way that money has been spending to try to solve it and the increase is going up, then you might think that this is not funding an effective solution. So if it's technology, maybe the technology to technology solution is not working. Um, Two, putting on my futurist hat and stepping out of the silo of the technology realm. Why are hackers hacking? Why are criminals like doing this? Why is this? Why is uh, what is it? Deep fakes as a service, or scamming as a service, or hacking as a service, right? Like, I mean, hackers are smart, scammers are smart, criminals are smart. Like, they want to make a living. You brought up like MIT has a lot of education that's out there for everyone. There are people that are very smart in other countries that have education. We keep talking about you need education, you need education. We've got so much education, but what do people do after they get the education? There's no pipeline to entry level good cybersecurity jobs. In fact, even in this country, there's all this talk about, and there were some posts I saw about IC squared, certification. You can't just get IC squared certification and practice for that test and be able to get an entry level job in cybersecurity. It doesn't exist. An entry level job in cybersecurity is someone that has like 3 to 5 years in IT. So there's this kind of like fallacy that you get this there's a gap between having some education and actually being able to get a job. And there's also this gap in between how many entry level jobs are actually available. And it's not even like in the US, it's global. So when I really pull back here, then I look at this as an economic problem. We had some crazy scenarios in our report, in our paper, that were like, how do you solve the problem? Like, is it as simply, and actually I had someone write me a question like, how do we change the incentives for like attackers? And if I
It
pull
sounds like
all the way back, yeah, sorry,
it
Mike, go
sounds
ahead.
like the strategy of like, don't fight the rats, eliminate the food source.
Yeah,
Where
or
go with the
or
root cause.
is it simply having a better entry level pathway for people who have security roles, and paying them well, and getting rid of this rock star mentality that you have to get the best rock star mentality and get someone who's good enough and train them in your systems? This goes against like all the Silicon Valley startup unicorn rocket ship ideas, but no one's looking into that. The other thing is like no one's doing any research about the future about this stuff. Like,
Mm,
I've had my paper quoted a few times. I did it under the New Security Paradigms Workshop, which is a workshop that focuses on new security
yeah,
paradigms.
I think
Most of
you're right about
security,
that.
most of
Yeah,
security research is like nitty gritty, like technical stuff, not like bigger picture stuff. And
or
I
funded by a vendor.
yeah, I wasn't funded. I was
Yeah.
self-funded. Like, I would love to partner with some teams or organizations and bring my futurist hat on and look at some stuff and do it. And I am certain that we will see things that no one else is seeing. As an example, I'll go got my paper up here at the very end. This was bonus content when we did it. We wrote this for the new security paradigms workshop. So I was like, well, let's come up with some new security paradigms. And one of the new security paradigms that we had back in 2018 that was completely radical and people's minds were blown to even kind of consider this was a possibility was the current paradigm is passwords as a paradigm. And the new paradigm, which was mind-blowing at the time, was no more passwords using zero-knowledge proofs or biometrics or something like this. Like, this is only like 5 years later. And we already have passkeys, and the whole conversation around a passwordless reality is mainstream. Some of the other paradigms we had were like, so we've talked about this. Security plays catch up, reactive. What would the world look like if security was proactive? What would the world look like if there were no more adversaries? What would the world look like if you didn't have to fight to get budget and security and InfoSec was just the cost of doing business, like paying your phone bill or like, well, I was going to say office rent, but maybe people don't do office rent. Here's a radical one. Bob and I were not sure if we wanted to put this in, but right now there's this idea of like, we have to defend everything. What if we had this idea of like shoot the wounded? Like, what systems are not working well right now? What systems are being targeted all the time? And is there a different way of doing that? For example, oh gee, I wonder if there might be a way to secure personal data that was not in a centralized repository. If only there was some technology that might conceive of that paradigm. We could possibly use that. It's a lot of work. And also, Eric, I was thinking, why are people putting all these investments in it? The idea I had this morning, it's exciting to make deals.
Yeah.
It's exciting to put things together. I remember the AOL Time Warner merger. I was part of a company that got acquired right after that. And people were up in arms. They were like, some people were like, this is going to be the biggest, amazing thing ever. And some people were like, you're ruining my retirement. And, whatever, 5 years later,
by the way, that was a great sale by Time. Fantastic timing by the Time management to get out of Dodge there. But anyway, we digress.
Yeah. So, and everyone was like, how could you make these bad decisions? Because people, business folks, deal making, buying and selling companies is based on excitement and emotion. You have to have the balance sheet. You have to have the logic to prove to do it. But you don't necessarily go in there with the idea of like, oh, this is a good deal. Like, I'm going to do this. It's an exciting thing. You think you're doing something exciting and you have this idea of the future. And you're not a futurist. You just use your gut, or you're looking at one trend out of hundreds, or you have like a biased view of the future. You're not thinking about some of those other
not thinking about the future in a rigorous way.
Yeah. And that's what a futurist does, is I look at the medium of the future, and there's an application of that with technology or ideas, or like I looked at the future of money. I looked at the future of wearables. You can look at the future of food. You can look at the future of space travel, the future of climate change. There's all these future things, and the same methodology I use to look at the future of cybersecurity, you can look at all of those. I just happen to come from the tech industry, so I can speak those languages.
Eric, I want to give you a chance to reflect, and then I'm going to pivot to the two elephants in the room, one being AI and the other being politics, which we never talk about on this show. But being as we're talking about the future, and one of the biggest unknowns for us happened to be a really recent election 2 days ago. Maybe we'll go there. But
well, maybe I'll give you a good segue to the AI thing. So I think about this a lot, right? Because what if it turns out in that investment scenario that the incentives are just misaligned with what we're actually trying to achieve, right? So, GPs are trying to make money for their LPs and they want, and the founders want to exit as unicorns and like everybody's trying to grow these things as big as possible, right? Like we're the fastest to 100 million, like that, as if that were the thing that we're trying to solve, right? Is companies that can grow to 100 million in ARR as fast as possible, right?
And 10
And,
million in less than 2.5 years,
and,
like,
and,
so
and
it
stuff that's
starts
like
early.
it's insane, right? It's like having these expectations are insane. And then we take that as companies and we shift that onto the customer, right? So that $66 billion in investment is chasing after $250 billion in enterprise cybersecurity spend this year, right? It's a huge number, right? And it's still not working. And what the industry says to those customers is, oh, you should be spending more, right? Healthcare is particularly vulnerable to cyber attacks, right? We see it's like headlines. I get something in the mail probably every other week saying, sorry, we lost your data again, right? And they're almost always from healthcare providers. I feel so. The question is, like, one of the questions is, why do we have an expectation as a society that healthcare companies should be very good, better than everybody else at cybersecurity? Like, we want them to do other stuff, like keep us healthy and cure illness, right? And so like we've created this crazy the expectations, the alignment of expectations on the way that we build and fund and measure success of companies is like causing us to have this weird societal expectation that people will be able to spend money and be really good at something that they probably shouldn't be good at, right? So that's one thing. The second thing I spend a lot of time thinking on right now, and I wrote about this in a couple of articles, newsletter articles recently on Substack, and it's AI, right? So this is AI. So now all of a sudden we have all of us, everybody, have at our disposal these very, very powerful tools that let us create software, and there's already a
Including
lot.
hackers.
Yeah, everybody, right? Including hackers, people that are non-technical, non-coders can now write software, and you can do it pretty sophisticated software and you can do it immediately, right? And this is not science fiction or the future. This is now. Like, this is possible now. So I guess one of the things that as you look into the future that seems really interesting to me is that the kinds of software and the way that we develop software is fundamentally changing right now. And so we talked about, like, 20 years ago, we talked about citizen developed software and low code, no code platforms and all that stuff. And it wasn't true. Like, nobody could actually do anything of meaning and purpose. I'm sure there's low code platform people out there that are going to throw rocks at me for saying
Yeah,
that.
as an ex-founder of Strata, that's a pretty tall.
But it didn't work, right? But now it does, right? You can write real software and run it, and you have these really smart, sophisticated assistants that help you do that, right?
We still
So
have
I
people writing
think that,
software, so I don't know.
yeah, but I think the way that software gets produced and the kinds of software that we run and the way that we run it is changing forever, like now. And I think that's really interesting for what does that say about the future and what does that say about vulnerabilities, right? So if I'm a big enterprise software company and I've been building products for years that some individual can now come and replicate and do just a good enough job that they don't need that thing anymore, but now you have this other piece of software running somewhere, like that changes the threat vectors and the landscape and the ecosystem of the stuff that's out there, right? And I find that, to me, is like some of the most fascinating stuff, and the way that AI is directly impacting what people do right now, because now we're all software developers, literally all software developers. Before it was like all companies are now software companies. Now it's like all the employees of all the companies are now software developers and could be their own software companies, right?
It is
And that's
terrifying.
crazy.
I
That's
want to show
kind of,
quickly.
oh, sorry.
Can I just show this is the Colossus scenario that you guys did, and this is actually not too far from our current situation. But one interesting thing that I'd like to point out is that maybe 5 years ago we would have anticipated that the cost of the attacker would go up. But what's actually happened is we've seen the cost has gone way down, especially with regard to phishing. Whereas you might have a team that might research a person and come up with a good spear phishing attack, a specifically targeted phishing attack. But today we've seen that AI is so good, it can establish a long-term relationship with you or really do a good job impersonating somebody that you know. And whereas you don't need a team anymore to do that, LLMs are doing that for you. And so we've seen that one of the reasons I think we're in such deep trouble right now is because the attacker costs things that were never possible before, like I'm going to have an AI call up and imitate your voice, and it's really going to sound like Heather. Or even a live stream. I always tell people, ask the video person you're talking to smile, because AI is really bad at teeth. But even doing a call to the call center in video, and some of the remote identity technologies are only 95% effective, the best ones.
Mhm.
And so the attacker cost, these things would have been unaffordable years ago, but now they're completely affordable. And so this particular future scenario variable is really dropped precipitously, and we're playing catch up in that. I'm curious, Heather, if you have any thoughts about this and or any of the other variables that you see as potentially going in other directions that we need to think about with regard to cybersecurity.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think if you think back to how I talked about the future has kind of two sides to it. It's got the current state and the forces of change. And back in 2018, yeah, it took you more time to do research. You'd have to be effective to do like deep fakes. You didn't have any of that kind of stuff. Sorry, I'm gonna turn my phone up. And today,
Is it
like,
really you, Heather?
yeah, yeah, it is. My phone just, yeah,
You're
I hate it.
smiling, I can tell.
Oh, my teeth, yes. Um, and so, yeah, absolutely. The attacker cost for using this particular attack has gone down. There may be other attacks where it has changed. Um, I couldn't tell you right now. One of the ones I want to talk about is how do we put it on here? If you look, if you want to bring that back up again, because I'm looking at my paper over here.
Sure.
We have non-state adversary population versus the nation-state adversary population. It's the number
Hmm.
3 and 4, right? So I would
True.
go
We're
so
in a
far
much
as to
more adversarial political situation right now, for sure,
so I
economically and physically. Yeah.
And so if you think about that, if you have a nation state adversary population, well, back 5 years ago, um, you could pretty much count on a nation state backed adversary population having more resources, which means they could do more. It was their day job to be like an adversary,
Sure.
um, whereas a non-state adversary population, if they were a successful hacker collective or something, they'd have more resources. But then you have like the social dynamics of a group of hackers, like leadership and all that kind of stuff. Today, it's interesting. I was saying that I think most of the most of the adversary population would be collectives, like hacker collectives or nation state backed. But there's this amazing story I've listened to. You guys might have remember it from a few years ago. I'm going to put a post next week about it. About the Hollywood con queen, who was
Uh-huh.
one person who impersonated like like more than seven, but like 7 Hollywood women, female producers, and was doing the scam, was scamming hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people for each one just like a couple thousand or maybe 5,000 here and there, but like it really added up. So one of my own thoughts was like, oh, you got collectives, you don't have single actors anymore. So I've really had to rethink that. That's one of the things
It
about a
reminds
future
me of
about
Thomas Friedman used to talk about the super empowered individual
yeah,
being a new attack vector almost. And I
yeah.
think you're seeing that yeah, maybe AI gives that individual that kind of power.
Yeah, absolutely. And my point about it is this is a snapshot in time. The paper and what we're talking about is a snapshot in time. Some of the stuff, like, I don't make predictions. In my opinion, anyone who makes a prediction is not a futurist and doesn't understand the medium of the future. That's my little soapbox. The reason to think about these things is to understand that the future is always changing, the present is always changing. And I want to empower you and me to understand what actions to take today to influence the future you want to happen. And we all have different kinds of power. A super empowered individual might have money, or AI might give us additional types of power. And I think that's also one of the things that we hasn't come up quite yet here in this conversation is, are you doing this for good? Or are you doing this for evil? Are you, the hackers' motivation? A lot of people, top three hacker motivation is money for nation state, and then the thrill of the con. There are people out there that they just want to see if they can pull one over on you. It's not, that's this Hollywood con queen thing. So I think if we want to truly reduce attacks and increase security, we need to look at the motivations of these adversaries. So from an economic perspective, the solution would be have more equality, have more jobs, have more good jobs where people could, have a job where that pays them well. If someone has a legitimate path to a life they want versus like a life of crime, what are they going to pick? I don't think, maybe some people will pick the life of crime. We'll get to that in a minute. Why are our nation states hacking each other and trying to get data and information, right? It's because we have a very insecure global world right now, because there's fear of resource scarcity because of climate change. Okay, so let's just figure out how to work together within each other's borders and respect each other's borders. I know it's Pollyanna, but I'm going to just speak to the motivations. And finally,
I'll
let's
get
talk
started
about,
on that.
we can go to the next. I'll just say my third point, which is for those who want to do it for the thrill of the con, there's a job for them too. Pen testers, come on, they're so great. Like, do it on the right side, do it on the right,
Yeah.
like, do it for fun. Like, figure out how to harness that curiosity and drive that increases security. I'll stop there.
Eric, so we're hitting the end. We try and keep these things around 45 minutes. Eric, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, last thought. One thing is, do we know what we're defending, right? And I think if you look back over, I don't know, the last few years, last maybe even 10 years, do you know how many users you have? Do you know what they can do? Do you know how many apps you have? Do you know who can access them? Like, do you know what's there? Like, I think there's still a lot of people that don't have a good grasp on that. And that's our current state that we're working from. So, like, what do we need to change so that we don't have that conversation, that we're not having that same conversation 5, 6, 10 years from now, right? That people have a way, like, they can take some action right now. I guess to your point, Heather, they can take some actions now so that that is not a true statement 10 years from now. Like, and what are those actions? And I don't think it's always spend more money. I think I actually believe that it's less software, right? Like, what we need is less, not more. It's so overwhelmingly complicated that no one understands it. So maybe let's think about doing less instead of more.
Eric, can I put you on the spot and just ask you, are you going to encourage your clients to be more rigorous about how they think about the future and maybe more creative about how they think about some of these potential future outcomes or
Yeah.
changes?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time on this, a lot of time with my clients. So, like, what does 5 years look like? Not like hopefully or optimistically, but like really based on what you're doing right now, what does 5 years look like? And be honest with yourself and realistic about that. And like, what do you want it to be?
Yeah. So Heather, last thoughts before we wrap?
I love talking about this. I want to apply it. If you have seen this conversation and you want to know more, or you're like inspired by the future, or you want to argue with me, or you disagree, or you want to know probabilities, please get in touch. Hopefully you can hear my passion and excitement for this. All I will say is that understanding the possibilities of the future, whether they are to secure a system that you have today or to create a new reality or an idea, like those happen with daily actions that you take. And you can make those a lot of different ways, just by your gut or like just randomly or whatever, you're stressed or overwhelmed. Or you can make a conscious decision about an action. The other thing I will say with that is don't expect the future to happen in a straight line. Life is long and there's many twists and turns, whether you're building a product or a company or a technology. And the importance of thinking about the future, I hate to bring in a new idea at the last minute, but my motivation for driving this is to help us and to help technologists reduce the amount of unintended consequences they introduce when they are putting solutions out into the future. So don't make technology that creates more problems. Make technology that solves them.
Awesome. Okay, well, this has been a great conversation. I want to encourage everyone who's listening out there to go to LinkedIn company page to Identity Office Hours and hit follow. We're trying to get to 1,000 followers. I'll publish takeaways like I always do within the next 24 hours. And the next episode, we're actually going to talk about Amazon's Cedar open source strategy with Amazon's open source evangelist, Ricardo Suarez, and Cedar's product manager, Julian Lovelock. And with that, I want to thank the guests and thank the audience, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Eric.